Golden Sound Story, The Flintstones, in Rocks to Riches. Down in the Slate and Company quarry, it seemed like a typical Stone Age day, as a Bronto crane lifted a boulder and let it fall. The workers raised their hammers and began chiseling. But high above, in the office of Company Vice President Cliff Vandercave, a terrible plan was being made. All I need is to trick one of those poor workers into helping us, and we'll be rich, said Cliff. Which one? Asked Miss Stone, his partner in crime. Just then the whistle blew. Out came a mighty yell. It was Fred Flintstone. Fred jumped into his car, cranked up his feet, and sped off. Follow the Flintstones. To the next page. As Fred screeched into his driveway, he was greeted by his wife Wilma, his daughter Pebbles, and his pet Dino, who knocked him to the ground. After supper, Fred and his best friend Barney Rubble jumped back into the car and headed for the Bedrock Bowl-O-Rama. When it was Fred's turn, he stepped up to the line and gave his bowling ball a mighty toss. Strike! Fred let out a yell. Fred's team cheered and Barney gave a toast. To my best friend Fred, who gave me the money to adopt my son Bam Bam. Somehow, someday, I'll make it up to you, Fred, he said, as Fred grabbed a ball for one final toss. Neither he nor Barney knew how soon Barney would get that chance. As the lunch whistle blew, the very next day, Cliff Vandercave approached Fred, Barney, and other workers. I'm here to announce the Slate and Company executive placement test, he said. Whoever scores highest will become our new junior vice president. Fred let out an excited yell. And he and Barney rushed to take the test. You have 1 hour, said Cliff, and the men lifted their number 2 chisels and began. An hour later, the whistle blew. As Barney took their test to the front, he saw how poorly Fred had done and remembered his promise. When no one was looking, Barney switched the test and handed them in. The next morning, Cliff called the workers together. Fred Flintstone had the highest test score, he said. Fred jumped in the air with a yell. As Barney and the men congratulated Fred, the whistle blew, and they headed off to the quarry. But not Fred. He went to his new office with Miss Stone, his secretary, met him with a pile of stone slabs to sign. She let the slabs fall right on Fred's hand. "I wouldn't sign those," said a voice as Miss Stone and Cliff left Fred's office. "It was Fred's dictabird. I know everything that goes on around here, and I wouldn't do it." Ignoring the dictabird's warning, Fred grabbed the stack and began chiseling. Just then, Cliff peered in. "Oh, and for your first assignment, I want you to fire Barney Rubble." That night, Fred walked to his car still thinking about Cliff's orders. He revved up his feet, roared off, and was soon home. He didn't even seem to notice when Dino knocked him down. He just got up and walked through the door. "Surprise!" everyone inside cheered, and Bam Bam shouted. 2. Barney and his wife Betty had thrown a surprise party to celebrate Fred's promotion. "Good job, Fred," Barney laughed and held out a gift. "You can't afford this," Fred told Barney, handing it back. "Because you had the lowest test score, I have to fire you." The next day, Miss Stone brought Fred more slabs to sign. Fred chiseled away, never guessing that he was signing away all of his friends' jobs. As a reward, Cliff gave Fred a big bonus and a raise. With their new riches, Fred and Wilma bought all kinds of luxuries. Now Fred cranked up his feet in a brand new LeSabre 2 5000. Wilma lounged about in jewels and designer clothes, and Dino wore a diamond-studded collar. The Rubbles, however, with no money to spare, moved in with Fred and Wilma. One night, Fred screeched into the driveway, picked up Wilma and Betty, and drove them to the fancy Cavern on the Green restaurant to celebrate Wilma's birthday. Barney, who just started a new job, was going to meet them there. While they waited for him, Fred accidentally knocked over a tray of glasses. A busboy hurried over to clean up the mess. It was Barney. He swept up the broken glass and carried it back towards the bar. There on the television was the news of how Fred had all the workers fired. The next morning, an unsuspecting Fred jumped into his car, cranked up his feet, and headed for work. At the quarry gates, he screeched to a halt as a group of angry co-workers surrounded him. "You're a traitor, Flintstone," they yelled. Fred ducked the mob and fled into the file room. Cliff sneaked in behind him. "Find anything?" Cliff asked. "Yes, I did," said Fred. "You've been stealing money from Slade and Company." "Thanks to your signatures," Cliff laughed. "I'll just call security and tell them we've uncovered a thief." As Cliff reached for the phone, Miss Stone hurried over to Fred and said, "Run while you have a chance." Fred cranked up his feet and took off running. That night, Betty and Bam Bam tried to console Wilma and Pebbles. Bam Bam hugged Pebbles and shouted. Suddenly, up ran Dino. He pointed at the television. There on the screen was a story about Fred and the stolen money. As they showed Fred's office, Wilma noticed Fred's dictabird. "I'll prove he's innocent," she said. Wilma and Betty raced to the car. Wilma cranked up her feet and sped off. Soon they were at the quarry. Wilma and Betty sneaked into Fred's office, grabbed the dictabird, and ran off. As Miss Stone and Cliff gathered up all their illegal money, they spotted the woman running away. "I must get that big mouth dictabird," screamed Cliff. Now a wanted man, Fred wandered the city wearing a disguise. Before long, he stumbled across a group of fired quarry workers who quickly recognized him. Fred cranked up his feet and sped off. The men followed in hot pursuit. Just as the mob closed in on Fred, they heard a screech. It was Barney, now driving a snow cone truck. "Hey, Fred," Barney yelled. "You know him?" asked one of the men in the mob. They grabbed Barney and tied both him and Fred to a tree. As they stood side by side, Barney and Fred made up with a handshake of their pinkies. Just then, with another loud screech, a car slammed into the tree. "Wait!" a voice cried out. It was Wilma. "Fred's innocent." Wilma let the dictabird tell the whole story. When they finally got home, Fred, Wilma, Barney, and Betty found the house in shambles. Someone had tied up Dino and left a note pinned to the crib. Fred read, "If you want to see your kids again, bring the dictabird to the quarry at dawn." At dawn, Fred and Barney were at the quarry. "Hand me the dictabird," demanded Cliff, slinking from the shadows. "First, we want our children," said Fred. Suddenly they heard Bam Bam shout. He and Pebbles sat high above on a rock slider conveyor belt. Cliff placed his hand on the machine on-off switch. As Fred held out the dictabird, Cliff grabbed it, flipped the lever to on, and fled. Fred jumped at the machine and tried to shut it off while Barney cranked up his feet and ran to save the kids. As the conveyor belt built up speed, Bam Bam shouted. Again, desperate now, Fred loaded a boulder onto a catapult. As he took aim at the rock slider, the dictabird escaped from Cliff. Cliff pulled out a slingshot, but before he could shoot, he was knocked cold. Behind him stood Miss Stone. "Hurry, Fred," she cried. Fred flung the boulder and it fell right onto the rock slider. As Barney raced to grab the kids, Fred let out a joyful yell. But then, noticing that Cliff was up and nearly out the gate, Fred picked up a boulder and tossed it at Cliff. "Strike!" Fred exclaimed as Cliff went down. Not long after, Wilma and Betty showed up with the police. After the dictabird told the whole story, the officers arrested Cliff and Miss Stone. When Mr. Slate showed up, he gave everyone their old jobs back and offered Fred a big promotion. "No thanks," Fred smiled, pointing to his family and friends. "I'm already the richest man alive."